Eindbazen wordt gesponsord door Nutrofit. De webshop voor natuurlijke voedingssupplementen en trainingsmaterialen die je helpen bij het verkrijgen van Total Human Optimization. Nutrofit is hofleverancier van merken zoals Onnit, Natural Stacks en Bulletproof Coffee. Probeer onze producten zonder risico door onze money back guarantee. Bezoek ons op www.nutrofit.nl. Bestel je voor 9 uur 's avonds, dan zorgen wij dat jouw bestelling de volgende dag geleverd wordt.
Yeah, no, it's actually amazing. I once saw a meme online that said the human brain is the only thing in the universe that named itself. I like that idea.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is true though.
I think it's. We spoke to people in that podcast that have the brain as a specialism, like neurologists, and one of the things that, it's not freaking me out, but that amazes me about it is, like you said, how little we actually understand about how it works, what it does, why it does what it does, and the mechanisms involved. And well, I don't know how you feel about free will, but these people keep telling me that there's a very limited margin for that. So that's something that keeps fascinating me. Do you have any particular feelings about that, by the way?
No, I don't.
Because it feels so much like you do have choice, right?
Yeah. Well, I think the existential reality is that you have choices and then you experience the consequences of those choices. Mm-hmm. And that's the learning. So, so you don't have free will, you have free choice. Mm. So you're
yeah.
You may not have been, as far as you know, the author of your existence, but you certainly are inside it and making choices.
Yeah.
For it.
I think that's a very good distinction. You don't have free will, but you have free choice. Because what people like Sam Harris have taught me is that the answers that come up to questions are not voluntary. Like if I ask you about name a city, you know a lot of cities, but there's just one you're going to pick. But you could have chosen out of all these different types of cities. And I think that's the part where you get a choice. There's a couple of options that pop into your brain, and you get to pick from those. Mm-hmm. You don't get to pick which options you get presented, but you get to pick between the options the brain presents.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah.
And I think that's where, for example, if you look at getting things done, why even though you may not have free will, it can help you because all of a sudden you have these options that you didn't have before. Like if you didn't know that in-baskets is a good idea, and now you do know, now you have the choice. So yeah, I like that distinction, free choice.
True. Yeah.
All right. That's a very philosophical start to this podcast. Yes.
Right.
But welcome back, I should say.
Thank you.
Welcome back. Yes,
Delighted
this is
to be back. Thanks
round 2
with
Mr. David Allen.
I'm older.
You're older and wiser. Yeah,
wiser. Yeah.
What's the best lesson you learned in those last 3 years? How did your life change after this podcast?
Automatically, I suppose.
It went to hell in a handbasket. What can I say? So, no, it was fun. It was fun to do that, and interesting because I love the long form that you guys are doing because it allows us to hang and and develop and uncover and unpack.
Yeah,
it's great. Good for you.
I think that's the biggest benefit of this type of conversation is that if I look at the shorter formats, is that you only take the default talking points. I don't know what the English word we call it stokpaardjes. Everybody has their little talking points that they use all the time. Mm-hmm. You only get to scratch those a little. But the fun part is if you go a little bit deeper and you look at the ideas behind concepts and how they came to be. Yeah. Like the last time I remember from the last conversation, what I found so interesting is that I got a better grasp on where this philosophy came from, talking about, for example, all the career moves you made, the stuff you encountered. And well, that's a good way to do it.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. What have I learned in the last 2 years? I've learned to sort of tolerate the fact that the body is probably not going to be immortal. So, the year of living medically, it's kind of like, number of tests and other things like that. But, come on, I'll be 74 this year. So, still cranking away, still works.
Do you have any hopes in longevity, medical research?
No, I don't really. I'm not interested in sticking around any longer than just naturally it's going to happen.
Really?
So yeah.
Is that something that was always was it always like that, or is that something that kind of developed as you progressed in your age?
Ooh, once I started to experience, the other levels that we exist on, I know this is just a classroom here, and happy to play in the classroom as much as I need to, as much as my karma, sort of dictates me to do that. So, I'm not interested in ending, this existence other than just how it may show up naturally, but I'm certainly not interested in prolonging it for any reason.
But I think that's mainly because there's a firm belief that, like you said, this is a classroom. Because there's in your mind, there's going to be an iteration behind this. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you're a firm believer in entropy, then you could be a little bit scared for the end. But if you look at it like you do, we might actually, I don't want to say look forward to it, but at least not with an existential dread or something like that.
Oh, sure. I don't have time for existential dread. Thank you.
It's very useless.
Yeah, I don't know that that does any good at all.
Yeah.
So what have you been up to in the last 2 years?
A lot of what's happened is because we now have partners that we've established around the world, and certified master trainers in these different regions to train the getting things done methodology as well as to coach it, and helping those folks get traction is a lot of what I've been focused on. So I was just in South Africa with our new partner there. I'll be in Prague with our partner there. I'll be in Moscow, in 3 or 4 or 5 weeks. I'll be in Virginia, so I'm still banging around out there, a lot of which is just to show up and sort of do the press and let people see that these are the people who have our imprimatur. These are the folks that are doing it, because there's so many pirates out there of GTD, saying, hey, these guys I have their back, essentially. Because a lot of them are still fairly small in their own consulting or training businesses, but they're all very much in love with GTD and want to do that. So helping them do all that, that's a lot of what I've been doing, and still traveling quite a bit to support that.
I have a question about that. It maybe taps into the little topic we were talking about earlier, like this is a classroom and this iteration. I think if you reflect on what you've done in this life, you can't deny that there's a legacy. If you look around, it's gone global. It touched a lot of people. How does that feel?
It feels great.
Yeah.
I am graced by all the powers that be to have, been able to uncover something like that does no harm, does nothing but improve people's condition. Mm-hmm. Even if you just keep a pen and paper by your bed, you'll sleep better. So, there's nothing, as we say, this is not running with scissors. There's nothing dangerous about GTD and about what this is about. And anybody implements any of this, it will give them more sense of control, more stability, more clarity, more focus. And come on, those are golden goodies.
Yep.
So it's great. And, I guess I paid my dues. It took a lot of years to sort of figure out what I wanted to do with my life. Mm-hmm. But, so having, I guess, the good graces to be able to do that. And boy, the legions of testimonials of still coming in for people that this just changed their life. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For the better.
Yeah. What I especially liked was the quote from the last podcast where you said, well, guys, it's not rocket science, but you can use it to build rockets. Mm-hmm. And it's simple in the fact that it uses elegant principles, but you can use it to accomplish very complex things.
Yeah, we use the image of an aperture and a camera that opens and closes based upon the light that you have. And the getting things done methodology can become as complex as your life is to help simplify it, or it can shrink down to as simple as your life is. So it's not like any kind of a prescription that you have to then follow some sort of a prescribed structure. Mm-hmm. The structure itself is flexible enough to be able to map to whatever your life is. Mm-hmm. I don't have nearly as many things on my list as I'd had 20 years ago, in terms of stuff to do. Mm-hmm. I still got big projects, but my system's much simpler because my life is a bit simpler, than it was.
maybe interesting to look at. You said I paid my dues, so the system arised from a certain stress and issues you encountered yourself in the work you did, like band-aids to the problems you encountered, sort of. Still, looking back at the way those moments were necessary to learn these lessons. Still, if you look back, what might be things that you, knowing what you know now, might have done differently?
Relax more.
Yeah, I was thinking that would be something like that.
I think I did relax, but I felt guilty about relaxing. So, now, like I love to sleep as long as I can sleep. I'm not a motivational speaker. I love to take naps. And I used to think, well, I was just lazy. Now, given the cognitive science, we know that you actually need rest.
Yeah.
That you need to be spontaneous. You need to daydream. You need to let your brain rest. Now it's like, okay, I'm sophisticated because, I just love to sleep, long. That's the night before. I always look at my calendar and see what the hard landscape is for the next day so I can see how long I can sleep in the morning.
Yeah.
I happen to love it. That's great.
What was one of the motivations to develop the GTD system to be super productive as a high achiever or a high performer?
Not really. I mean, people can use it to do that. It certainly enhances, all of those abilities. To be able to get more stuff done with less effort. Mine was just an interest in clear space. I'm a freedom guy. It's like don't fence me in with distractions or worry or anything that is essentially unproductive use of your energy. So I love the feeling of freedom. I love the feeling of that sort of clarity and clear space. Mm-hmm. So as my life got more complex, obviously it was pretty easy to screw up clear space. So that was a lot of my motivation, was just uncovering stuff that allowed me to stay clear. Uh-huh. So be in the world, but not of it. So, again, I was not into rice bowl and cave. I was much more into enjoying the good things of life, but not letting myself get too wrapped up in them. Yeah. And so being able to stay free of that and then being able to then pick and choose, to me, that was my motivator. It wasn't like I was in trouble. I mean, I had a mentor of mine that taught me the two critical elements of GTD, which is the mind sweep, getting stuff out of your head, and then deciding next actions on those things that have your attention. I didn't make that up. Dean did, my mentor. But once he walked me through that process, I went, oh my God, how cool is that? Yeah. My life, I was fine. I had no idea what clear space would actually really feel like until I actually had that experience. Once I had that experience, I went, whoa, that is just so wicked cool. And then I turned around, because I just started my own little consulting practice, I turned around and started using those techniques with my clients, and it produced exactly the same result. Mm-hmm. More freedom, more clarity, more spontaneity, more room to focus on meaningful stuff. I said, wow, that's really cool.
And it really helps with the part you touched earlier, the relaxation part, because I see a lot of quality of free time sort of dissipating because people are there. For example, if you go to a wellness center and you didn't do a mind sweep, what's going to happen once you sit in that sauna? Yeah. You're going to be mulling over all that stuff that you still need to do, which seriously takes away the relaxation part. And what I liked about it is that I wrote down a quote from Ready for Anything, is that your power is proportional to your ability to relax. Mm-hmm. So even if your goal is to be as productive as you can be, you need to understand that the rest is going to enable you to do more. And I think that's a switch that a lot of people have a hard time making because they feel, like you said, guilty about taking spare time.
Well, a tense muscle is a slow one. So I learned this in the martial arts. If you really, really want to focus, you need to be really relaxed. Mm. And so, that the ability to then be able to then manifest a focus to a large degree is dependent upon your ability to relax. Mm. So, if you look at Olympic athletes, right before they go perform, what do you see them doing? Stretching, relaxing, breathing, right? Because that allows then you get more blood to the brain, you're more functional or whatever. So there is a very direct relationship between relaxation and focus and your ability to manifest power. So, if I were sparring with you, I'd love nothing more than to get you upset.
Yeah.
Because then you're going to overreact, and then they can fake you. And so, then I win. So the whole idea of being present doesn't necessarily mean in some sartorial, some sort
No,
of
no, no,
relaxing state. You can be present running a 4-minute mile. So you being present just allows you to be where you are and have your full attention where you want to put it.
Yes.
And that may look like a lot of different things, not necessarily quiet.
Yeah, actually, I had a conversation about that the other day with Mark Tichelaar. He's all about attention spans and focus. And something he actually taught me was that sometimes what you need to do to focus is to fill your brain. We think we need to be all empty and one in the moment, but no, if you want to concentrate on something, sometimes you have an overcapacity. Your brain thinks too fast, and that's why it gets distracted. And then you either need to up the pace just a little, just to make it uncomfortable, or you fill it with something else that's not distracting.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, wow, you don't need to be quiet in order to focus. That was a eye-opener for me.
Yeah. Mark's a smart guy.
Oh, you know.
Oh, yeah.
How do you fill it with something that's not distracting?
I like music.
Yeah.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
Or visual stimuli.
And some people actually need, one of the best practices of, getting things done in GTD is a weekly review. So once a week, you need to step back and sort of bring up the rear guard, if you will, and close the loops and get clear about stuff that's shown up in the last few days. And some people can do that best in a very busy environment, like going to a coffee shop in the morning, when lots of people, lots of things going on, because that then forces you to focus in a way.
Yeah.
Sometimes the difficult thing would be to be in a totally quiet space, because people complain. It's funny. People complain about 300 emails a day. You should listen to your own mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. How many thoughts are banging around in your brain out there?
More than 300, I bet.
I'll bet. No kidding. So sometimes it actually does help you focus if there is enough stimulation around in your environment. I think that has a lot to do with people's individual neurology.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what I find fascinating is, and that goes back to what we started about the brain, is that we learn a lot of new stuff about the brain that actually confirms this. And this was actually something you touched on, that some of these things that we didn't quite know when we started GTD now actually get confirmed by science. So we're like, aha, we were right all along. This little bit about attention is one. What are other things that we intuitively kind of knew but are now actually confirmed?
Well, Roy Baumeister is one of the top researchers in cognitive science in the U.S. And
Sounds like a Dutch name, though.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, Roy Baumeister.
Yeah,
Is he Dutch?
And I don't know what his genes. I don't know what.
Sorry for
I
interrupting.
don't know all that. He co-wrote with John Tierney, who was a research journalist with the New York Times. He wrote the book Willpower. And, they've sort of popularized the idea of decision fatigue. But Roy had done a good bit of research. As a matter of fact, Roy and John, flew out to California, where I was still living at the time. They said, David, how come you've discovered this 35 years ago and we've just sort of uncovered this stuff in our research, about the Zeigarnik effect, that when you open loops keep spinning in your brain, and how to sort of manage that. And Baumeister, one of the things he came up with, discovering, and they've now proven this, that you don't actually have to finish something, but you need to trust that you've got a reminder in the right place that you'll see at the right time, and then the brain gets to let it go. So, I learned that a long time ago, just with that, externalizing all of these things that have our attention, parking them in the appropriate places. Two guys that did, some major research on this, from the Free University of Brussels. One of them, his expertise was in insect behavior. And, if you ever had 2 ants in your kitchen and then 200, what happened? Well, the worker ants programmed to go find food. They find food, they're programmed to take it back to the nest. But when they take that food back to the nest, they're dropping a pheromone trail. So then the next worker ant shows up and goes, hey, pheromones, yeah. And so that happens until the food runs out.
Yeah.
Right. So basically the ant has no brain, has no memory, but it does some highly effective things because it's programmed to do those things at the right time. So in a way, once you've gotten all this stuff out of your head, you've parked all the errands you need to run on an errands list, all the phone calls you need to make on a calls list, all the projects that you need to keep track of. You loop back around and you see those things. You go, okay, let me go do that. So you were smart at one time. that then made a smart decision about stuff. So you didn't have to be that smart to do smart stuff.
Yeah, and to complete the analogy, so what you're saying is by placing it on a list, you're basically like the two worker ants.
Yeah.
And then the brain kind of knows where to go,
Loops back around.
and then it starts working on it.
Yeah. It looks at it. It kind of like, oh, let me go finish that. Let me go do that. You actually love to accomplish. You love to do stuff like that, but you don't want to have to think too much. You need to have already thought. See, the smart people really realize you're only smart at random moments.
Yeah. It's very selective, I've noticed.
Right, are inspired. So when you are smart or inspired, get yourself to think and make the decisions you need to make about the things that have your attention. That's cognitive muscle that you need to train and learn to use. Once you do that, though, you don't want to have to rethink that. You know, it's kind of like putting stuff in front of the door so you don't forget it in the morning, right? The night before, you were smart enough to realize that whoever's going to walk through the door may barely be conscious, if at all. Duh, what's this? Oh, that's right, I got to take it with me.
Yeah.
Right? So you made a smart decision, put stuff in the right place so you could be kind of thick and dumb with no memory and do smart stuff.
I actually do that.
Duh.
I put stuff in front of my front door so that I don't forget it. Yeah, of course.
But it also helps to get started. Like, for example, if I have to do an important project, instead of starting on a Monday morning, look into it on Sunday evening, and then somewhere in your subconscious, you're busy with it. And I already kind of feel that I started the project a little bit.
Yeah.
And it helps, especially it helps in the creative process.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Is that the same with the example with the ants? Because if we complete actions, we tend to look at that in the moment that we spend time and energy, like actively time and energy, because now we're going to fix it. But I think there's something that starts going on before that. The moment you write it down, the brain makes it a goal. And now it starts analyzing your environment, and it's like, well, we have obstacles, we have instruments, this is what we want to achieve. But that all happens in sort of like the back of your head.
Well, it in a way, getting things done is nothing more than getting an inventory of the things that you need to focus on at the right time in the right place. So it's really about focus. So, you know, just a little hand scratching on a piece of paper, but it's a list. And you look at that list, some part of you focuses on it. Sometimes, many times I write something down on the list and I just will automatically see it, you know, in the world out there, simply because, to your point, you know, that just already started programming some sort of subliminal thing that's noticing those patterns. So the reticular formation in your brain is just a pattern recognition for you. That's why, you know, if you start to think about buying a new scooter or car or something like that, you start to see them everywhere, right? And that's how that happens. If you look around the room for the color red, you know, what happens is that your unconscious sees it first and then makes you conscious of it. So you're unconsciously made conscious of information. And you can program that. You can learn how to do that. I mean, that's something that we're doing all the time, really. But by having all this stuff externalized and going through it on some consistent basis and looking at all that, a lot of stuff gets put into motion almost automatically, simply by having a tool to focus yourself.
Yeah, I don't know if we talked about this the last podcast, but I think reticular activating system is the explanation for the law of attraction. I don't know if you noticed, by the way, if you Google your name, there's a very law of attraction-y book out there by another David Allen. Apparently, I was doing my prep. I was like, this can't be right. I can't believe he wrote this, but I found out that wasn't true. But still, the law of attraction, like this phenomenon that if you think about certain things, it magically sort of pops up in your life. I think this is the example, because it's not true that something out there is tossing all these scooters or cars on the road to convince you that it's a good idea to buy this particular car.
Right.
I think it's just the mind that's primed in a particular way. I think that's reticular activating system.
Yeah, I've worked that formula consciously since, golly, I ran across affirmations and visualization and ideal scene stuff in the early 1980, 1981. And you know, the first thing I wrote when I wrote Getting Things Done was the reviews.
You wrote the reviews?
I wrote the reviews first. Because and unfortunately, that raised the bar. It took me 4 years to make the book as good as the reviews, said it. But that was my way of affirming, how valuable the book was going to be.
So, you're not talking about the weekly or the daily review. We're talking about the reviews from the book.
Yeah.
You imagined the reviews.
I imagine.
I imagine great success.
I made up the reviews and who wrote them. And they didn't wind up doing the reviews of the book, but it framed it so that my reticular filter started to go, okay, it's got to be that good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we talk in that regard a little bit about goal setting, because the importance is, well, it's very evident here. I don't think the GTD phenomena would have been such a thing if you wouldn't have done that. Is that fair to say?
That's probably fair to say. You know, I'm a little hesitant to champion goal setting. I think goal setting and planning is highly overrated.
That's interesting.
I to a large degree, I think having an image of success, having an image of how you'd like to experience or what you'd like to be having or whatever is, and if you could, and you can call that goals. I mean, you're goal setting all the time. To get out of the room, you're seeing yourself out of the room, and then you're moving your body to match the picture you got. So you can't stop.
So what do you mean when you say I'm not a champion of goal setting? Is it like the big, hairy, audacious goal philosophy? Yeah. Don't tell me the sky's the limit when there are footsteps on the moon, that kind of stuff?
Yeah. If that's real for you, that is, then sure, you need to acknowledge those things that you want or want to experience. But that's not, in my experience, that's not necessarily something that you have to do to have a successful life.
No. You should not set goals just to set goals. Like, when you see yourself being on the stage with 600 people as a dream and you really feel it, that's the thing you have to go after.
Yeah.
But you shouldn't write up a goal to earn $10 million.
Well, I think then the definition of a goal is something that's used a little bit more freely. If you don't want to feel as much stress as you do at your work right now because you work too much overtime, then you have a goal. Namely, make sure you spend your time better or restore your work-life balance. I think that's a goal as well.
Sure. Yeah, indeed.
Well, I was wondering about, are you familiar with the concept Ikigai? It's this Japanese concept that when you think about your life's goals, mission, vision, and purpose, that in the Western philosophy, it's all about, well, it can be anything, but it's usually a little self-centered as well. Like it's my life, my goals, the best version of myself. Whereas to Ikigai focuses more on the value you can bring to others. Because like, well, you're a very fine example of this yourself. It feels a certain way to be touching people in a positive manner, and that motivates you to keep going and stuff like that. But never heard of that concept apparently.
Yeah, no, I haven't heard. I mean, I couldn't argue with that. I mean, I think that's great stuff to do. You know, my philosophy has been, and my approach has always been, and I think one of the unique things about GTD is that it starts with where you are, not with where you should be.
Yeah, it's bottom up.
So it's, well, not necessarily bottom up. If where you are is top, then we start at top. In other words, if where you are is focused on your life purpose and your values, we'll start there. Go great.
All right.
You know? So it oftentimes people misunderstand because, you know, if I ask most people to write down the first 20 things that have their attention, almost nobody writes down fulfilled destiny as human spirit on the planet. You know, they write down babysitter, or I need tires on my car. I need to hire a vice president of marketing, or, you know, I got a tooth that's broken.
Yeah.
You know, because, you know, if your day-to-day is out of control, don't try to give yourself anything bigger. You'll just create frustration and guilt
For not achieving or moving towards those
goals. But what happens is if you get your day-to-day under control, it automatically gives you a grounded sense that allows you kind of to lift like a balloon into higher spaces in terms of your focus. So, again, you know, we start with where you are. If where you are is you're focused on your life purpose or what do you want to do? It's like, great. You know, what's the final outcome that you're after and what's the next action? So we're still going to bring it down to the reality of, okay, so what are you going to do about that? But it'll start with wherever you are.
Yeah. Starting point is important though.
Yeah, I always like the runway analogy. Like people usually, when they do leadership and goal setting, they're thinking about the tropical island that they want to go to. But like the runway is full of junk, so your plane actually can't take off.
Right.
Because I always
or maybe you took off, but you can't land because you got no landing gear.
Yeah.
You know, so.
And we're all out of parachutes.
Yeah.
So you just mentioned the word decision fatigueness. Explain that to me.
Well, it takes energy to make decisions. You know, it's a cognitive muscle you actually have to work. And Baumeister and Tierney in their book, I don't remember exactly the amounts, but there's only a certain amount of the day, a certain number of hours you can actually think, and still function really well. I think it was about 4 hours. If you sat down and tried to write, a chapter of a book, about 4 hours is about all you're going to have.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't
Mark,
know what your experience, with that would be, but
no, Mark's kind of scolded me on that one. I had a focus week a couple of weeks back, and I was like, I was writing 8 to 12 hours a day. He's like, wow, you wasted 6 hours. That's great. I'm like, And he's right. But yeah, I think that's true. 4 hours max productivity a day.
yeah, thinking's hard. Thinking's hard. Very few people think. Most people react, but they don't think. Thinking is, you actually have to think.
Yeah.
What I mess myself up with. The best guy to ask is you. Planning in creative blocks to write my book. Getting here in the office, all fresh up, nothing to do, just writing, sitting here, and then the inspiration doesn't come.
Yeah.
How to handle? Because
I think it was Picasso that said inspiration is for amateurs.
Yeah.
It's called butt in chair, boot computer, hit friggin' key.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Get going. Don't wait to be inspired.
Stephen Pressfield,
Just
do the work.
Yeah, well, sometimes I
That
sit
feels
here for my focus span. I think my focus span is about 3 to 4 hours when I'm really into it, and I just go after it. And I feel when the tank is empty pretty well. But sometimes in that last half hour of those 3 hours, that's where the real magic happens.
That's when the muse enters.
Yeah, the muse enters. Yeah, Stephen Pressfield called it that
Yeah.
as well. You ever wrote his work?
no, I know Stephen. Yeah, he's a good guy.
And sometimes I can get upset with myself not being productive for 4 hours, having written what I want, or and it's I try to figure out whether am I a good writer. Sometimes I sit here and I think, I hate this, And sometimes I write it and I'm really enthusiastic about it. And
No, I'm the same way. I love to have written.
yeah.
But writing is a bitch because you have to think.
Yeah.
You're having to make decisions. What word do I use? What phrase do I use? How do I do that?
And it matters so much.
It does.
Yes.
It's huge. One of the things that I did, I don't know if you can relate to this at all, but when I first wrote the first edition of Getting Things Done, they had a copy editor that went through all the text, and I thought, oh my God, are they going to screw up my language? Are they going to? And just the opposite. As I say, it was almost like they gave it a bath.
Yeah.
They took a sentence that I used 25 words and they said it in 14, and it was actually the way I would have said it, had I done that. So what I did was I took the whole copy edited version and I retyped the whole book with their copy edits. So it would train me how to think like a copy editor.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Really, really helped.
Yeah, for me, a writing course really helped. Like with my first draft, I went to a writer school here in Amsterdam, and basically I sent it out. They were like, "Do you have any writing experience?" Like, "Yeah, I wrote blogs and stuff. Like, we got our own podcast." They're like, "Now, do you really have experience in writing?" "No, I'll send you the first edit of my book." And I got an email back, and they're like, "Well, we can't even allow you to the course because you need to be able to write first." I'm like, "What do you mean? I want to learn to write." And then after being 30, they would let me enter, and then I really found out, like, wow, yeah, I was just writing up my thoughts instead of showing the conversations that people were having. That people can have their own imagination, and writing is an art, but I love it every week more. The more that I do it, the better I get at it, and yeah.
It's a skill.
It's a powerful tool. Yeah,
It is. Yeah.
And it really it trains me to practice this the focus state definitely. But I do battle my inner critic a lot. Yeah, it's confronting.
But that phenomenon that you described, that in the last 30 minutes, the good stuff happens. Like that. Do you believe in the muse? Like that concept that if you sit down and you do the work, eventually the good stuff will come up. Even I don't need to externalize it as an entity, but the phenomenon in itself, because I think it's true.
Yeah. I think that's true. But I don't know that when the muse is going to strike.
No, you don't. But you feel when it's there.
It may strike the minute you sit down and start writing.
Yeah,
it could be there. So.
What I feel that is a progress bar completing. Before the good ideas come, first you need to wrestle with it. You need to let it sink down. Then you need to activate it again. And the more you engage with it, a progress bar just keeps filling up. And then all of a sudden, it's like at 100, and then ding, this is the idea. This is what I've been looking for. And I think that is what the Muse is. The completion of that particular process, which you can have on all several ideas. And sometimes the progress bar jumps to 100 right in the morning because you did some thinking during the night in your subconscious, and then it just starts flowing out.
Well, they do know now that, you know, there have been a number of studies, you know, that show that sleeping on things, you know, is very important to come up with innovative solutions to stuff. Yeah. But you have to have the intention to solve it.
Yeah.
Oh.
So you actually need to say, I need the answer to this thing. So you need to have an intention for a solution or for an idea, for whatever, and then sleep on it. Because then apparently sleeping allows you to then bypass your conscious conditioning, and it allows you to make connections that you wouldn't make otherwise.
Yeah.
So they know that now. And I think Theo Companoli's book, Brain Chains, you know, Theo's book, work, as well as Baumeister, I can't remember which one of them, you know, quoted those studies, but very interesting that they have actually found that you come up with better solutions if you sleep on it. But you have to program, essentially, you know, with your intention that you want to have the solution.
But that last detail was something that's new. I didn't know that. I knew that you could probably solve problems in your unconscious when you slept, but I didn't know you need to have the attention. But then again, the prime example that I know and use is like from programming. Yeah. Like if I used to be an IT guy and you're programming something and it doesn't work and frustrated, you go to bed, and then the next morning it's so clear. It's right over there, deadline, forgot something. But but then you have the intention right before you go to bed because it was the last thing you were doing. Yeah.
Carl Newport wrote a book, Deep Work. Have you read it as well? It's taken longer. He's describing to take.
I read about it. I didn't read the book.
It's definitely. I like it a lot to keep focus, keep away from distractions. So if you have a problem, you just sit in a room, stare at the blank wall, and just think about the problem for an hour. If you're in that car, don't listen to music, but think about your problem. And he's all about deep work blocks, getting into this creative state more easily. But there's a big part of it, preparing it. And just overthinking it. And I used to be just sitting at my laptop and just, okay, now I'm going to write. And, you know, now just take a piece of paper and just start planning it. And it's more of a...
You should have done that before that.
Yeah, well, I think it's my way of writing a book, and I think it's different for everyone. I mean, we've had people in podcast here who write bestsellers within 2 weeks. They just go on a holiday for 2 weeks. They type a book and they go home. They go home. I'm like, what do you have that I don't have?
They're different, yeah.
So, does that have to do with different neurology, brain?
I don't know.
No, but I think it's true that if you want true, like that deep work, it's basically about flow states, I guess. To get into a state of flow, which is like a special mind state. It's something you can measure, and it really helps. The way I learned it is that the moment you want to go into that deep work state, you want to assemble, and you don't want to be busy. Like for example, if you want to make a report and you still have to ask the numbers from the sales guys, you can't get into flow because not all the prerequisites are there. Yeah, and it's very important to make sure you have these in advance. So you can actually, if you have to go to your email inbox to find something you need for the project you're working on, and you want to concentrate on.
Sure,
you're screwed.
Well, it's the French chef's mise en place. You know, before you start, you have everything that you're going to need. Yeah. So you have, you know, my experience is you're most creative when you have the freedom to make a mess. But if you're in a mess, you can't make one. So you need to clean house so that you have the freedom to make a mess. That means you need to have a blank sheet in front of you to have the freedom to write a crappy first draft. You know. Because editing is really where the art is. So giving yourself permission to write a really bad first draft and then go back and edit, from my experience, that's why word processors were such a game changer, because you know your mind likes to have ideas, then later on figure out what to do with them.
Yeah.
So the freedom to just start writing and then come back and then edit. Thank God for Microsoft Word.
That's so interesting you said that, because now I completely get why word processors were a thing. When I was a kid, my dad was enthused about Word 2.1. He's like, this is amazing. I was like, when do we get to play games? I don't get it. Why is this so? But I never realized, because he was a cop and he had to make a lot of reports. But they used to do that on typewriters. I remember that. They had typewriters. I get to go to the police station every now and then, get to sit in the jail, play with the computers they had back then. But they did typewriting. and you can't edit in that way. I never
Man,
realized that.
you know, you guys aren't old enough to remember erase tape, but I guarantee you that you have little tape.
Yeah.
You make a mistake, you have to then put the tape in and hit the key that was the wrong key, so that then it
don't remember
erases
this.
it.
No.
Well,
I do remember Tipex, which was
Yeah.
like cover over stick. But yeah,
believe me, you know that before you have an idea, damn well better be a good one. And it's like that's
Yeah.
so constipating for your thinking process.
Wow.
You know, it's awful.
Still, there were monks copying the Bible by hand,
by hand, yeah.
or actually writing books by hand.
It makes me realize how impatient we have become.
Because
Because it's I can't imagine writing a book like I do now if I had to go about it that way. Like not too much.
Yeah,
of
but
it.
it will be the only option. It will be the only option. You can compare it now with what you've experienced. So if that's
true,
if that's
true.
the will,
If you know this is a
Yeah.
reality as well, and you have to go back to typewriters. You wouldn't do
yeah.
it. But
I
still.
mean, imagine when they got the first typewriter, they were like, "Oh shit,
Yeah.
this is convenient."
really,
Even if you type it wrong, you can put the sticker thing on it. You know, yeah, it's different.
It's true. It's true. Yeah. Well, talking about that, the impact of technology. One of the things that getting things done has managed to do is spawn a lot of apps that support it. How do you feel about getting things done and the carrier of the system? Because I used to be a digital guy. I love these apps. I think I tried them all until a couple of years back, but then I switched back to paper because I think this works way better for me. It fits my brain better. But do you have a preference in that? So the way you implement it?
For me personally, I love the digital world because of how many connections you can make and how many things you can tie together, you know, and cut and paste and link and so forth. So I'm kind of an end user nerd. You know, if it's small, black, and high tech and expensive, I want it.
You like it.
And
Yeah.
later on, I'll figure out if it actually does anything. You know, but that I don't know how many things. My buy to use ratio is probably 10-1. You know, over the last 30 years or so. I capture low tech. You know, because pen and paper is a whole lot easier. No Wi-Fi, no batteries required. Very much easier to do that. So I like just capturing. You know, random ideas or whatever. I still have my little note taker wallet with me in my pocket. You know, it's been there for 35 years. You know, and it's easier. That's much easier to do because that's not ultimately the system. It's a systematic way to grab the stuff to begin with. But then I'll throw away probably 80% of my notes. I just don't know which 80% those are to begin with because I think they're all brilliant. You know, until the next morning, come on, David, too much wine. You know, what a stupid thought. You know, come on. But I don't miss any, so I don't miss anything. So to me, and you know, I also have really nice journals and nice fountain pens, which I love to do every once in a while. I'll kind of get into journal mode, and you know, it's a more subtle way to sort of clear your head with that stuff. And I love handwriting with that.
So how do you journal then? You journal just like tasks, or you journal like experiences, feelings, or
Yeah, just whatever.
Yeah.
You know, whatever's up. It's kind of a brain dump, kind of like whatever's going on. I'm not waiting to get inspired to journal. I just start writing. I just start even just describing what I'm seeing. The room is warm. There are lights on. There's people talking, whatever. All I have to do is get started, and the flow. Then it'll start to flow.
I thought you meant by journaling that you actually make for example, a list and write down what's not only the actions but the stuff that actually happened. Because I see a lot of people working with action lists, and they still have the phenomenon that they drive home and it's like, well, I don't know what I did today. It's like, why don't you write down every disruption you ever had that day, and then you start to journal your day, and then you can make decisions. But that's something else.
This is something else. Mostly my journaling is more just a meditative exercise. I'm not capturing reminders or to-dos or whatever. That goes into my system.
What's the benefit for you to do this?
Just seems to, it's kind of like clearing cobwebs, you know, out of my brain, out of my psyche.
Sort of like mental stretching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly that. And I don't do it all the time. You know, I go through periods where I haven't journaled, you know, for months, and then I'll go through, you know, sort of clean out my fountain pens and, you know, crank them up again, and, you know, and I'll spend 2 or 3 weeks, you know, and I'll be journaling. Oftentimes, that's how I'll start my meditation, is by journaling, because that just tends to clear the deck and allows me to sort of focus more on the inner world, and but my GTD system, I still have lists, and that's in the digital form because I've got a great program that my CTO for 15 years designed that sits on top of Notes, IBM Notes, and that does something that no matter all those other apps out there can't do what it does. If I write you an email, I've got a little radio button that goes waiting for it, automatically throws it on my waiting for list, automatically puts your name on it, automatically date stamps it. You can't. There's nothing out there that does that. It wouldn't be hard to design that, but
Why don't you release that yourself?
I've tried twice in my career to work on whether or not we could build a real GTD app. They're all just list managers, frankly.
Yeah.
But and neither one of them worked. They were both quite instructive in terms of what we learned about that. But this is the first iteration was back in the mid '90s, kind of in the high tech, glory days of San Francisco, and we built an app. It was called Actioneer, and it was very cool. But unfortunately, the Microsoft Outlook started to take wind. The desktop and the Palm Pilot showed up, and so there were a lot of other tools that were showing up out there, and there wasn't, the amount of programming that it would take. If I said, Michelle, I need to call Michelle by Friday, right? What would you do with that? I need to call him by Friday.
By Friday.
So it would go on my calls list with the due date, and it would also show up on the calendar on Friday. Hey, called Michelle yet, dude? Question mark.
Yeah.
So, but just the programming that would have taken to do that in a calendar, just would have taken many more, hundreds of thousands of dollars of programming time that we didn't have back then. So there was a lot of the sophistication that if you were really going to do a true system, the system would have to include calendar, email, everything else, as opposed to right now it's still pretty labor intensive for all of us. You gotta cut and paste. I'm using Evernote for that, and I'm using email for this, and I've got my calendar over here, and you're still having to figure out how to integrate all that, as opposed to build a dashboard that can pull all that data together and curate it for you.
And the most recent attempt? How did that end?
About 3 years, I worked with Charles Simonia's team, Intentional Software. Charles built Word and Excel and Microsoft Office. I mean, these are smart guys.
Yeah.
And we spent about 3 years taking a look at the methodology that he had come up with, which was pretty sophisticated. But it really was about taking a whole data set in one database, and then letting you then program how you wanted to see and manipulate that data. So you could sort of bypass programmers and let you see it. So they developed quite a bit of technology around that. And we thought, well, maybe that could be the source or the seat of perhaps a really GTD, and the technology just wasn't there, nor the market.
Sounds like something that was only for power users if you approach it that way.
Yeah, and it needed to be bidirectional. You're not going to give up Dropbox or Evernote or Outlook or any of those things.
No.
What you're going to do is you wanted something that would integrate that data from it, but it needs to be bidirectional. So you pull it up, the raw data out of Evernote. You need to be able to then, if you change it then on your dashboard, it needs to be able to go back into that program. Yeah. And the legal issues and the tech issues and the financial issues of just trying to make that. And that's just one app. I can imagine, all the plethora of stuff out there that everybody's got.
And how many years ago was this last attempt? Because it lasted 3 years, but
it was pretty much. We ended that right about when I moved to Amsterdam, so that's like 5 years ago. So there was 3 years before that.
Yeah,
and very smart people, man. Branch Hendrick, who was he was the sort of project lead on their end that worked very closely with me. And Branch, he had been head of robotics strategy for Microsoft.
Yeah.
This guy was not dumb, and he spent 6 months looking at every single app out there and unpacking it to see what was missing, and he did an amazing amount of research. So anyway, it was a big research project.
Yeah, I get it.
Good to know. I mean, ultimately, guys, you want to be able to walk into the room and say David Allen, and suddenly I show up in a hologram. And then anything that you've ever seen or thought about me, you could see that attached to it. You could then walk over and say, oh, here's what it is, and here's what we want to talk about. And how many things could we add value to right now if you just put it in front of your face?
Yep.
Right? And if you had all of those things, see, where technology is going is decision support.
Yeah.
Like, what should you look at before you talk to me or before your next podcast? What do you need to see? What are the potentially relevant things?
Or
that
when should
might,
you do it?
Yeah, that might make a difference, that would add value to it. So, before you go home on the weekend or whatever, what do I want to see about my daughter or my niece's birthday coming up? Where, come on, guys, how much data is out there that then, if you put the right stuff in front of your face at the right time, you could add value to that.
Yeah.
Right. So that, to me, is where the digital future is going to go.
It would be fascinating to read the findings of that report, the analysis of the apps, because I thought about what would the perfect time management, getting things done app look like as well. The main thing that used to be a problem is actually quite manageable now, and that's the interfaces. Because you're right, I'm not going to leave Dropbox, I'm not going to leave Gmail, I'm not going to do that. But if we manage to interface with that, with a layer above that kind of pulls out and inputs all these things, I think if you focus on like the 3-4 biggest players, then you got 80% of the world population. And if you manage those guys as sort of an interface, then you can actually manage to like sort of in that top layer enforce the methodology. You shouldn't try to make an app that does all these things that all these specialized apps do. You should find a way to tie them all together.
Sure.
With a special, yeah. So,
yeah.
So I was very
how
curious.
many attorneys are you going to have to get those APIs all set up? Come on.
Yeah, well, actually, I don't know if that would be such a problem, because I think a lot of these companies understand that they are like Dropbox. They understand they're a part of a bigger process and that people use all kinds of apps to interface with them to do whatever they want to do better. Like, for example, a great task manager that does this excellently is Asana. Has interfaces with like every calendar app imaginable. They focus on integration. So maybe that 5 years ago, that used to be an issue. Nowadays, software developers get a little more, and they have these default ports on their software that allows you to talk to them. But then again, I've not looked into this, and I think you have, so it might be more complicated than that.
No, you may be ahead of me. I just kind of gave it up, because nobody was actually coming up with anything other than the list managers. And nobody had gone beyond that. And there are a lot of good list managers out there, a lot of different bells and whistles in them.
Do you remember what the main thing was missing from that report?
Well, the main thing was the integration, essentially. How many different things? I need a date, I need time, I need location, I need names, I need, and so all the different data points, in object-oriented thinking.
Yeah.
All the different things that you would need to manage in some way to be able to have all of that in one integrated database.
Yeah.
That was the challenge. You could do it, but you'd have to, garbage in, garbage out. So you still need to have all the inputs, of all that data, in there.
Yeah.
And also, you were going to need to tie it to your calendar and tie it to email and tie it to all your communications. Right. And that's
not easy.
That's a lot of stuff to do, to try to do that. And, and frankly, look, most people are still keeping crap in their head. So why do they think they need to buy something like that? Right.
Yeah.
So, again, I'm 73. I'm a little old and cranky right now. It's like, come on.
Yeah. Get started with the basics first, then start.
Well, I think that's a tendency that people have. I mean, I've seen some great implementations of working with systems, but I've seen some very over-designed ones as well. And I think that's definitely a risk if you start working with this. Which actually brings me to a fun quote we can talk about. You said something in Ready for Anything. The effectiveness of your system is inversely proportional to your awareness of it. Remember that?
Oh, that's interesting. Did I say that? Yeah.
Apparently.
Yeah.
Well, I found it very interesting because I think it's true.
Well, you don't want to be thinking about your system. You want to be using it.
It's not a goal in itself.
Yeah, not a goal in itself. And too control is out of control. If you're not open and flexible enough to be able to then navigate, quickly and fast and recalibrate fast, then you're going to be over controlled. And back to your point, a lot of software is over structured. And that's sorry, I call it Naziware. You don't
Naziware.
You don't. It has to be loose and flexible enough to be able to map to the speed that you're moving.
Yeah,
and the volume that you're working with.
It should support your workflow, not dictate it.
Correct.
Yeah, I
indeed.
get it. Yeah, that's hard. That's always hard with software, though, to do that, especially because it's the prime process that everybody uses this system to get all their other shit done. So they do it in a very very particular way, and it's hard to change that. So
sure.
Yeah, I think that's a big. I have a question about that. Can you make everybody use the system?
No.
No, you gave that up.
No, I gave that up a long time
then
ago.
I should as well. Yeah.
See, GTD is for anybody, but not for everybody. You have to, interestingly, over all these years, the people who wind up taking to it are the people who need it the least. They're already the most productive, systematic people that you'll ever meet.
They just want to increase it.
They just want to increase it. The big presenting issue is room. Most people have created out beyond their own system's ability to keep up with it. So it's the most productive people that are actually feeling most overwhelmed and out of control.
Yeah.
They've just overcreated and their system hasn't kept up with that, or they haven't. So they're the ones that are probably hungriest, for getting things done because it instantly gives them more room, gives them more space. I coached a guy, a couple of years ago for a whole year. And, Brad is one of the most, by anybody's standards, one of the most productive people you'd ever meet. Got his own jet. He built Groupon and sold it, and his new startup Uptake, at just 2 years old, had a $2 billion market cap, profitable from day one. He's on 4 boards. He teaches entrepreneurialism at the University of Chicago. This guy is, by anybody's standards, you would be one of the most productive people you've ever met. And he is probably one of the most productive people I've ever met. Sharpest, bright, quick, fast. But his presenting issue to me was, he said, David, I'm only 47. I feel like I'm just getting traction, but I got no more room. He wakes up with $1 million ideas. He's just got no place to put them and nobody to give them to.
Yeah.
So we spent a year just being able to structure it better so he had more room and to be able to take advantage of his creativity. Amazing.
Yeah. So if you look at a guy like that, what kind of simple techniques do you teach him that immediately increase that capacity?
Oh, come on. It's just the basic stuff. Write it down. Get the stuff out of your head.
How is a guy like that not already doing that?
He's already doing it to some degree, but not completely. Very few people really, really do it completely. There's a huge difference, but 95%, the difference between 95% out of their head. See, the problem is if you have 95% of this out of your head, you don't know how much there is because you don't know what's left in the 5%. The difference between 95% and 100% is a light year. Once you get it all, it's a whole different game.
And so getting to 100% full externalizing of everything you hold in your brain is sort of like the holy grail. This is probably a hard question to answer, but how do you know if you're 100%? Do you actually feel that? It's not like there's nothing anymore.
There's nothing else.
Yeah.
There's nothing, and if something pops in, you grab it then.
Yeah,
it becomes just your style. I mean, that's just what you do. That's why I don't think about it. I just do it. Because it's still a little subtle. Sometimes I catch myself go, David, come on. You've thought that you needed that light bulb 3 times. You teach this shit. Come on.
Yeah.
Would you just write that down somewhere? Put it in the right place. So I still have to catch myself. With that stuff, because it's so seductive. When you're thinking of it, it seems so obvious. You're sure you'll never forget it. And then 2 minutes later, the next obvious thing you're sure you won't forget, you forgot the first thing.
Maybe a little bit of a mean question, but does the missus ever use it against you? Like, David, come on, man. You teach people how to do this. Yeah. Why is this not fixed yet?
I think you wrote a nice book about it.
No, but she and I will grab each other's notebook because she carries one too many times, and I'll write down something for her. I said, Catherine, you want me to write that down? She said, yeah, that'd be great, David. So I'll write it down and throw a little piece of paper in her end basket, or she'll do the same for me. So yeah, part of our lifestyle.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I think it's great if you have similar philosophies on this. I mean, imagine how it would be like if you wouldn't have any of this. That could be a big frustration.
Well, it's funny. I got a couple of staff people who their life partner doesn't do any of this, and they just tolerate. They just have to manage around it. So
it becomes a desired outcome in itself.
Yeah. But Catherine took a seminar of mine 35 years ago, and she's been doing this, ever since. People often ask, what's her system? I go, beats me. I have no idea. I've never looked in her system. I just know where her in basket is. She knows where mine is. So that's all we need to know. I don't know what she does. I know she uses OmniFocus, but I don't know. I've never looked at her list. I've never seen what she does. But she does this.
Interesting. The both of you are currently living in Holland. Yeah, I find it very. By the way, I want to touch on that a little. Yeah, well, we have this thing where we ask every guest to send a message to our king, and it's not a big secret. But I love what you said about Holland, and I think it bears repeating for our fellow Dutchies. We should hear this every once and again.
Well, all you guys need to do is leave the Netherlands for about 2 years and then come back.
Yeah.
Come on. You know people that have left and came back. I had no idea what silver spoon I was born with.
Yeah.
Things work here. They really do.
Yeah.
Relatively speaking, there's still all the issues, that any country's got. But, as I say, it's such an island right now of global thinking and open thinking. At least the Republic of Amsterdam.
The Republic.
I know that's kind of like the Republic of San Francisco, and it's a very, very similar place. Same size, by the way.
What's noticeable about that is that only Amsterdam actually feels like that. So if you're in Amsterdam, you feel like you're in the Republic of Amsterdam, and everybody else, you're just the capital. But as someone that's not from the capital, yes, I get that sense.
Right. No, but we love it. Just quality of life, and again, things work. And it's much more the center of my world now that we're doing so much work globally, supporting all of our partners around the world. I mean, come on, I'm only 3 hours from Moscow. I was 11 hours to Cape Town, but same time zone. So,
jet lag.
That was cool. Yeah. So, and come on, Schiphol is such a great airport. And, guys, where I live, I walk out my door and I check in at KLM in 25 minutes.
Yeah.
Because I'm 8-minute walk from Zoud station. Yeah. So all I have to do is hop on and it works. Yeah. And, come on, now it's a foodie capital of the world. Catherine and I love good food and wine, so, couldn't be better.
Yeah, it's interesting how you forget these things. And because I noticed you saying it, and it's like, because if we think about America or Canada, we're like, wow, that's just like Holland. I mean, you got everything over there that we got over here. Maybe it's even better. But we had another guest here who was from Canada, Mr. Jordan Peterson. And he basically said the same. We actually got into it in the podcast. It's like in countries like Holland, like in the West and even Germany, you guys don't understand how much trust there is. And he used the example of eBay. Like you can just, in the West, you can just give someone money and you can assume reasonably that he will send you the package that you actually paid him for. And that's not like that around the world. And you should really appreciate that, because it's easy if it's right in front of your nose to ignore it. But I find it very interesting to hear you say the same thing. It's like, we keep forgetting that.
And you guys, come on, at least from my limited experience, but I've been here 5 years now. But you take it easy in a way.
We do?
You do. I on the weekends, come on, barely. If I go out on a Saturday or Sunday morning, there's nobody's doing anything. Everybody's resting. Everybody's reading a paper. Everybody's whatever. Or you see, parents with their 3 kids on their bike, just going somewhere. And you're so externally focused. And again, there's no bad weather. They're just bad clothes. So,
I like that.
That Dutch weather is, I love it. It's frankly, it's interesting.
When I went to Florida last year, just talking to Uber drivers, like, hey, what are you doing here? How's Uber going for you? It's my second job, and they have 2 or 3 jobs going on, and then I asked them why. Well, just to pay the rent, pay your groceries and stuff, and then I came more to my mind that America's so expensive to live. Not for the rich, I guess, because it doesn't really matter because they're rich. But for the average person, well, man, it's it's tough to live there. Yeah. It's tough to get around and get that relaxation in.
Yeah, and it's also true. there's good and bad news about, I still love America. I mean, it was certainly a fabulous place to grow up, and I can't fault any of that. There's something about, and I don't know, maybe you can frame this, say it better than I can, but there's something about, the Dutch that we've talked to, and especially, I've talked to a lot of people in the startup world out there, and they say, like, America is where Silicon Valley is where you're going to make $1 gazillion. But the aspirational aspect of it, it's almost like the Dutch are okay to not have that kind of aspirations, which is kind of good and bad news. It's like, you're fine, your lifestyle.
Oh, yeah.
Your lifestyle is fine. You're not trying to beat everybody's game.
Like we were practicing the Dutch right before the podcast in Holland. What you're describing is the phenomenon. Doe maar normaal, dan doe je al gek genoeg. So just be normal. You're crazy enough as it is. And that's the moment you stick out above the cornfield. It's like back down.
Right.
Yeah, I think maybe that's it.
Well, I don't think we have the high achieve or the success culture that America has. And when I go to a congress in America and it's with entrepreneurs, it's all about making millions and selling $200,000 programs, blah blah.
But maybe that's also because of what that particular future promises us. Probably tackles something that they experience now. Like, for example, if you've experienced poverty, of course you're going to grind for it. You want to be a millionaire, we got it good. So maybe we're like, well, I got my food, I got my internet, why bother?
Yeah, I think a lot of the freedom that is presented on these congresses or seminars is presented by money gives you freedom. And I do believe that with less money, you can experience more freedom here in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
With less money, you can experience more freedom. Yeah, and nobody needs to go hungry in Holland.
I was actually looking at a movie from I forgot his name, but he was training his team in sales, and he's talking about, like, if you want to make $1 million, go for 10 million, and he's explaining this to his team, and he's like, how many groceries do you do in a week? Like $900 in a Walmart, or like the Whole Foods. It's just like the organic shop thing. Like $900 a week. It's like, how do you do groceries for $900 a week? It's like, like you can buy a stock for 2 months, and that's, so it has different level of expenses, I guess.
Yeah, and in Holland, it's even worse if you look at, for example, well, you decided to live in the expensive part of Holland. If you go to where I'm from, just 2 hours drive to the east, houses cost significantly less. I mean, I don't know what your rent is, but you can probably buy a palace over in the east. So then there's that thing as well.
Sure. Well, that's probably going to happen pretty much anywhere. But come on, guys, one of the biggest sources of bankruptcy in the United States is healthcare.
Yeah.
And you don't have that issue here.
No.
Like, thank you. Wow. You know what, Catherine and I, just our health insurance that we got through our company in California, we were paying $25,000, $30,000 a year for that, and no better coverage than we have here. And we're paying 3,000 euros, for that, and great healthcare. As far as my experience, and you guys all complain about everything all the time, so
we do, don't we? Yeah. That's why I want to zoom in on this a little. We got it good. We need to hear this.
No, every doctor that I've dealt with and every healthcare, place that I've gone, and I've had, quite a number of sort of minor things, that I've been dealing with here, and they're just all so elegant, and they're not egotistical. They're not, pretending they are God, and they're just regular folks, and really, really lovely and very gracious, and I haven't had to wait very much, for all of that. So, boy, again, leave the Netherlands and then come back.
Yeah, count your blessings.
Really.
Have you had many medical things in the last few years?
Not too many. A little minor surgery on my hand, and I had cataract surgery.
So you're in good health.
Yeah. I'm still walking around.
Yeah, still walking around, but already. But you are thinking about passing on the torch.
Yeah. Well. It's kind of like, I sort of approached all of this in my career and getting things done as just high anticipation, but no expectation. People want it, that's great. And I want to get it to people that might be interested in it, but I'm not going to beat anybody up or bang them on the head. And I always keep thinking, well, maybe everybody who's ever going to be interested in GTD has now got it, and they'll all stop. But I'm still doing 2 or 3 podcasts a week, after 18 years. Still the world still seems to be, banging on the door,
Craving for it.
about this stuff. So it's going. And now, given that we've got really, really good master trainers, and we've had very rigorous program to certify the master trainers, we've got about probably 25 or 30 master trainers now. And they were trained in English, but then they are then certified to then certify trainers within their own language and their own regions. And a good dozen of those, if I got run over by a bus tonight, or got hit by any one of those bikes in Amsterdam, they'll carry the torch. This is the train's left the station, essentially, in terms of getting things done, is out there now. And, the book is still, the new edition is still bestseller, still selling, because it's evergreen. It really is evergreen stuff. I mean, you're going to need, when we fly to Jupiter in 2090, you're still going to need an Eindbazen. You're still going to have to decide next actions on have your attention. You're not going to, this is not going to go away in terms of the principles themselves.
The only way this can go away is if we can start really augmenting our brains. So if I can sort of put a chip in there that like writes it way automatically, then maybe. But
yeah, maybe.
On the other hand, we're going to stay humans. And like you said, there seems to be an ever-growing, it doesn't stop, the demand is still there. But that maybe has to do something with the generations behind us as well. I think they even face these problems a bit more.
Probably. And actually, we just counted up about 3,000 people a month are going through GTD trainings around the world. So, at least.
Keeps growing.
Yeah. Keeps good. It's just steady state,
Can we look a little at, like I said, the generation? I got nephews. They're entering their teens now. One of them is going to the higher level education soon. So the overwhelm is going to start pretty soon. His life is going to be more than just computer games. And I'm already starting to teach him little things. Like it could be good if you do this. And there's a teens edition for getting things done.
Right.
What are the big differences that the way we approach getting things done towards teens as compared to, for example, professionals or adults?
None.
It's the same book.
Same book, exactly same book with just cartoons in there. Makes it a little bit easier to play, and we created Cortland and Iggy, basically to stand for the frontal cortex and the amygdala. Which are the things that kids are having to deal with, Iggy and Cortland, right? And Cortland is the smart guy that's conscious and focused, and Iggy's the scatterbrained and distracted and playing games, and the other part. So just characterizing some of those things that we've had a lot of adults say, "Wow, I like the teen book myself." So it was easier for them to start and see it, because getting things done I didn't write it as a training tool. I wrote it as a manual. So it's a lot of people, it's daunting. They look at that and they go, "Oh my God, there's so much, much to do." There's so much in there, because I didn't hold back. I put everything in my 30 years of. I just put it all in there. I didn't want it, because it's a holistic model. I didn't want to short sheet it, in any way.
I'm sorry about this, but I threw your book through the room once. And it was on an iPad. And that was the part when I was, when you were telling me, okay, you need to gather everything. I was like, everything? Yes, everything. You need to go over all your files, all your emails, everything in your house. Like, no way, man. This is going to take way too long. I'm not going to do this. I was actually upset. Then I threw the book away and I was like, yeah, but what's the alternative? What are you going to do? Feel like this forever? So I picked it back up and I got to it. But still, yeah.
Well, so you got it. So yes, it's a bit daunting. So that's something that I've learned certainly over the last 10 years or so, as we've been structuring and designing sort of our global curriculum for getting things done. And I'm not an instructional designer. That's not my area of expertise, but we've had a lot of people who are, who've then looked at it and said, "God, you got to simplify this, David. You got to make it easier to play. You got to, tone it down." So that's been somewhat agonizing to me. Just like, okay, okay, let's make it simpler, but I want to make sure that the whole game is in there in case somebody wants it. So So that's a lot of what we've been doing is actually, simplifying the methodology so it was easier for people to play.
Yeah, I can imagine that if you take kids as an audience, that automatically happens. Have you worked a lot with children and implementing the methodology?
I haven't. No, Catherine and I don't have kids. We know, people. The two co-authors, of the book, they did really the heavy lifting and most of the writing of it. But Mike was my CEO for several years, and he raised his two kids. They're, one of them's in college now, one of them's, a teenager. And he, from the early days, he was teaching them this stuff. So he's got a lot of examples of, what really worked well.
I think that,
and the other co-author, Mark Wallace, Mark is a public school teacher in Minneapolis in the U.S. And he ran across GTD. It blew him away. And he said, I can't hold this back from my kids. And so he's been teaching his kids, in the public school. They're 9, 10, and 11 years old. So he's already seen that it's possible for them to get it. They get it easy, actually, probably even easier than a lot of adults get it.
Yeah.
Because they go, okay, that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because I was wondering about the link towards the education system. We talked to a lot of guests, and they all seem to have an opinion about what could be improved about the education system as well. And I always think, well, we should teach kids like a system, like something like GTD, at least the basics, because nowadays the first time you get in touch with that for maybe an hour is when you start doing your university and so your science degree or something. Then maybe if you're lucky in the first week at school, they're going to tell you a little bit about time management, and that's when you have an education that actually thinks that's important, and they get to check that mark. Yeah, they know how to work with the system now, and we both know that can't be taught in an hour.
Sure.
So how is that experiment working out where he's teaching getting things done to these 9 and 10-year-olds?
Works really well. They get it. I walked in one day and, there were 20 kids doing weekly reviews. And Mark had the weekly review checklist on the wall. And he said, just go check with them, see what they're doing, David. So one kid, I said, what are you doing? He said, well, I'm getting clean. What was that? He was just clearing out his pack of all the stuff he'd accumulated during the week, right? And then it's somebody else. I said, what are you doing? Well, we're getting current. We're a little behind on my math homework, so I'm catching up so that we can get creative. I walked over to two girls and said, what are you doing? Well, we gotten clean and we've gotten current, so we're being creative right now. I said, well, what are you doing? And they were surfing the web to see how to design a successful interview program on TV. They're 10 years old.
Yeah.
Right? So they got it. They were obviously doing and most adults go, oh, the weekly review, I can't get it. I'm not going to do it. So, that I've always thought, well, the kids, if we could reach the kids, that would make the biggest difference out there in that way. And again, most school systems, they're being given information but not taught how to process it.
Yeah.
And that's the, I don't know, all the studies, but basically, most of the kids graduating from your schools right now will there are jobs that you don't even know yet that they're going to be that they'll be involved in.
Yeah.
And things are changing so fast. And and funny, I met a woman I don't know, a few months ago. Her son is 11 years old. He had 5,000 WhatsApps on his phone.
What?
It's like, wow. My God. She said, well, he was smart enough to go, I don't bother too much about all that. He was still doing his homework. But, the plethora of inputs that the kids are dealing with.
Yeah.
And again, to Teo's point, it's highly addictive too, the social media thing, because, one of the basic ways you can create an addiction is random positive reinforcement. And there's probably no more random positive reinforcement than social media. There's a lot of crap, but there's a lot of cool stuff. So.
Yeah, and it feels a certain way. I get it.
You mean with all the gratification and likes and hearts and
oh yeah, huge.
We joke around a lot here that we wouldn't have managed if we were teens now. We would have been hopelessly lost. No internet for us in our teens, and that was probably for the best.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. So what is the big hill for adults doing their weekly review? Is it confronting?
It's just a habit that it's one of the toughest habits to build in, because you just think, I don't have time to sit down and regroup. You just get too busy and you're not doing it. And it's just something that people really have to, get themselves used to, that feeling, of doing it. And it seems to be, over these years, I ran across, I can't remember exactly what the source of it was, but I ran across a study that if you go longer than about 7 or 8 days for something and trying to remember what happened like 9 or 10 days ago, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. But if you can catch it within the last 7 days, some part of you can, create context much easier. So there's a kind of a Control-Alt-Delete. There's kind of a data dump that happens after about 7 days in terms of just you remembering stuff. So there does seem to be something about a weekly sort of cycle, to kind of bring up the rear guard, as I say, and get yourself current. Because come on, every one of us has probably had stuff show up in the last 3 or 4 days that you got to do something about, but you haven't had time to sit down and identify what the project is or what you're going to do about it next as the next step. You just know you got it. So we've got to build in those kind of times. And certainly over the years, I've dealt with a lot of people in the corporate training world, who were responsible for executive education in their companies. And, without fail, they usually say the biggest need is reflection time. And if they're not building that in, if an executive is not building in sufficient reflection time to think strategically, to think creatively, to think whatever, they're going to be driven by latest and loudest and not strategy.
There was a teacher here, Michaela Schippers. She teaches at Erasmus University, and she was also involved with the Future Authoring program they did in, I think, the Erasmus University with Dr. Jordan Peterson. And she basically said there's this holy free unison of progress, which is goal setting, consistency, so the way you organize your work. But the biggest part, and the often most neglected part, is the reflection part. It's like that. It's what you need to, and in Agile and Scrum, we already learned this in making software. You can't determine the end goal without evaluating what you've learned along the way. Your information is going to change, what you want is going to change. And that's why you need to do these things, because most people just put a mark on the horizon and just keep going without evaluating where they are. So that's the way she explained it.
Yeah.
It's very important to process what you've learned in order to change your course. It should be basically an iteration.
Yeah. It makes total sense. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Well, even though this is more high-level reflection, I mean, the weekly review obviously has a little bit more operational side to it as well.
Yeah, it does. But you can also include in the weekly review looking at your bigger game, looking at bigger pictures, looking at the orienting yourself using maps. And really, it's all about just creating maps for yourself to look at. I was a sailor for, had my own sailboat for a couple of years. And it's such a great analogy because the map room has a lot of different maps, right? But you want to make sure you're looking at the right map if you're trying to get out of the harbor so you don't hit something. But you also want to make sure then you pull out another map to make sure you get to Hawaii instead of Canada, right? So there's all these different maps that you need to see to locate yourself in space and time. So GTD is really about creating orienting maps. You go out for errands. Let me see all the errands I need to run. Let me look at the 45 or 75 projects I've got. And again, most people have 30 to 100 projects, in terms of a broad definition of something you can't finish with one action step that you can finish within the next few weeks or months. And, most people have huge inventories of stuff they haven't even identified yet. But once you get that inventory, that's again why it's so critical to get 100% out. So you're looking at the whole game. I think a lot of people, I think a lot of people keep stuff in their head. It gives them a false sense of control.
By keeping it in their head.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's something they like to brag about. I can remember everything. And it's like, all right, so what did you eat 4 days ago? It's like, I don't know. But that's not important. No, but still.
Yeah.
Something I have a question on, and you might know something about, is the topic of procrastination. I think you've noticed this. You can probably teach someone to slice and dice everything to the first action they need to do. They have a list. They know exactly what to do and they have the time, but still they don't do it.
Yeah.
What's that?
I don't know. You'd have to take the person very specifically and say why they are resisting doing it. They may be resisting because it's just not that important anymore. A lot of people have stuff on their list because it was important at one point, and they're still on the list. But life has changed. You've changed. Things have moved forward. You need to move it to someday maybe list or just dump it. So sometimes it's because the thing isn't that relevant anymore, and people just need to become more conscious about that. Or if it is relevant and they're still avoiding it, oftentimes I think it's because they still, even if they've sliced it down to the very next action step, they don't feel like they can engage in that action step successfully. I mean, the greatest human fear is the fear of being out of control.
Yeah.
You know, people are killing themselves and each other as we speak just to maintain or achieve a sense of psychological control. It's that powerful a driver of human behavior. For us normal, sane people, the way that shows up is you tend to not want to engage with something that you don't feel like you can control immediately successfully.
So where the outcome is unsure, it kind of creates a fear of.
Or you just don't know what the next step is, you know. Yeah. And if you haven't decided the very next action step, is that boot computer? Is that surf the web? Is that send an email? Is that talk to your partner? What's the very next thing you need to do? If you haven't figured that out yet, then there's a gap, there's a void between here and the outcome. And so it requires thinking. Again, back to our point of thinking and decision making. If you don't make that decision about what doing would look like, you know, the two elements of getting things done are what does done mean and what does doing look like and where does it happen? And once you clarify those things, it lowers the barrier of entry like tremendously. I mean, but to your point, if you're still avoiding doing it, it's probably because you haven't got it granular enough.
Yeah.
And there's still some part of you. See, the people who procrastinate the most are the most sensitive, creative, and intelligent people, right? Because your sensitivity and intelligence and creativity, you know, allow you to, in a quarter of a second, to generate incredible phantoms and evil demons that's going to, you know, eat you alive if it's not done totally perfectly.
Ah, yeah.
So you freak yourself out.
Guilty.
Oh, come on, who doesn't procrastinate? The people you give stuff to do, blah, 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 like they're so thick and insensitive, they're not aware of all the stuff that could go wrong.
The grunts.
They could, you know. So, so you have to intelligently dumb yourself down. You know, so that's tricky business. You know,
I think that's interesting. With granular, what you mean more specific?
More specific.
Yes.
You know, if you're well, let's say you're an accountant and you do people's taxes, right? You might have to do Cindy's taxes might be one single action because it's just so simple. You know, no big deal. You're not freaking yourself out. But to do Jose's taxes, you know, that's going to take you a week long, amount of stuff. So, you know, you need to get it granular enough that some part of you can see yourself doing it successfully to begin with. You see yourself getting started, essentially. You know, so you know what the kickstart is on this. And, you know, again, that's probably the biggest reason people procrastinate is they haven't figured that out.
In this particular case, do you mean because we know for Karen, the tax return is manageable because we got the scope in mind? It's like, this is like 2 forms.
You can do it in one sitting. You know,
Yeah,
it's an obvious thing to do.
And for Jose, for example, you the right thing to do might be to chop up that big task into a few smaller tasks.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, actually, just what's the very next thing you would need to do Jose's taxes? Oh, God. Oh, you know what I probably ought to do is, and that's the thinking process most people go through. But believe me, I spent thousands of hours with some of the best and brightest people, sitting down with them, having them agonize through those decisions.
Yeah.
About all the stuff that they've written down.
Yeah. Something I've noticed as well is that the size of the next action or the way you describe it also has an effect. For example, if I tell you, make an appointment with Wickard, you put that on your list. You're like, all right, I can do that. But you might not do it. And if I say, look up Wickard's number or email address, then all of a sudden it's, oh yeah, I can do that. Let's go.
Right. So, it has to be that granular so you can see actually how to do it. Set meeting is not a next action.
No.
No. Write email is.
Write an email to set the next appointment to, for example. Yeah. So you need to formulate it as something. Yeah,
it's one of the things people will oftentimes, what causes people to fall off the wagon. They may have started GTD and started it, but ultimately they kind of fall off. And one of the biggest reasons is they let themselves get lazy and start putting non-next actions on their action list. Then when you look at it, some part of you knows, well, I still have to think and decide about that, and I don't have the energy to think and decide right now. Stop reminding me I'm overwhelmed. And most people's to-do lists, you'll see things like mom or bank, or tooth.
Safe marriage.
Or VP of finance. And you say, yeah, great. So what are you going to need to do about your tooth or the VP of finance? Oh yeah, I guess I got to decide. And that's oftentimes what people are avoiding is the decision making.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing how painful that process actually is.
Until you get used to it. I mean, again, that is one of the habits you can actually build. So you just start to think that way. But it is a cognitive muscle you have to train. You have to train yourself to think outcome and action.
Yeah, you get
They
stronger.
they don't show up by themselves. Certainly as knowledge workers. I mean, knowledge work, started, that changed the game out there because it was no longer self-evident what your work was. You actually had to think to decide what the work is. And the late, great Peter Drucker would tell everybody, your toughest job as a knowledge worker is to define what your work is, because it doesn't show up self-defined, right? You actually have to sit down and think, what does done mean and what does doing look like? And those don't show up by themselves. You're not born doing it.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, well, it just, if you want to be really cynical, you could say that we're not built for that kind of complexity. Because if you look at what knowledge workers do compared to what you're meant to do, like the brain, it's supposed to solve problems like, well, we have this chasm over here. There's a banana on the other side. I have a stick and there's a vine hanging there. I could probably fix this. But that's a pretty crude problem to solve. And what I've noticed is that it gets harder the more detailed and the more intricate it gets. That's where, for me personally, it gets harder. The high level stuff, it's pretty, yeah, sure, action, we do this. But the thinking is in the detail. The devil is in the details, basically.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Indeed.
a hard process. How do you successfully maybe coax or get people to do this? I mean, that's probably a big part of your career is helping people get this integrated into their system enough to keep doing it.
Yeah, I don't know. I've agonized for 35 years about how to do that and how to get better at convincing people that this is a really good thing to do. People really need to engage with this to really get it. I mean, you can understand it just cognitively, get stuff out of your head, clarify actions and outcomes, park the things in appropriate trusted places, reflect and review on the inventory on a consistent basis. So you make trusted choices about what you do. I mean, that is the methodology, right? So you can understand that, but to actually then do that where you go through the process, that's a lot of what our training is getting people to actually engage with this so they get a chance to, oh my God, oh wow, that feels a lot different. Now I can see light at the end of the tunnel. Now I can see this. So getting people to engage with it. A lot of my work, I guess, has been sort of like the used car salesman. Hey, come on in, folks. It's great. And I just need to go model this stuff and demonstrate what it's like to have nothing on your mind, to have a busy life. Because that's just who I am and how I am. Yeah. So a lot of it is just modeling that and letting people see. It took me a while, in the early days, I was kind of showed up as kind of a corporate guy because that's a lot of what my work was in the corporate training world. And the first edition of the book was really targeted to the fast track professional because they were the people first getting hit with the tsunami of emails and so forth. And they were the hungriest for it. And they were in organizations that were willing to pay for the training and the coaching. So that it was targeted that way. But then, we had some really smart folks take a look at it and they go, gee, David, when people meet you, you're nothing like what they thought I was going to be. Everybody thinks that I'm this anal retentive, like highly organized, like structured guy. And that is the furthest from, who I am and how I am. So for us to be a little more authentic in terms of just showing up, and for me too, that was a big change in our brand. So if you go look at our website right now, you'll see me out in the front yard, and and I'm not in a suit and tie anymore.
Oh.
So that was a change for us to sort of reflect. Come on, guys, this is all about. It's not about sweating harder. It's not about working harder. It's really about being able to be present with whatever you're doing.
Yeah,
making that the message. That was a pretty big turnaround for us too.
Well, seriously, I think it's a tool to improve your life quality.
Sure.
Definitely, because one of the biggest benefits that working with a system has brought me is that it made me aware of the stuff that is going well, that the progress that is being made. I mean, we talked about endorphins and some addictions that social media bring. What's really addictive too? Putting on checks on a task list.
No kidding.
Very addictive.
And it's funny, Michelle, because you mentioned you've kind of gone back to paper. For 20 plus years, I used a paper planner, and it was really great because I would make my list in ballpoint pen, and then I carried a highlighter with me. So whenever I finished something, I could highlight across it. Then all the unhighlighted ones, things would stand out. But boy, just that feeling of
yes.
done, you know, yay,
I like that.
you know,
That's a
it's
good
just
idea.
so cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's
Plus,
my
what
feeling.
so that's an aspect, and what it really does is because everything that gets your attention. Usually, the first things you should move on. At least, maybe you have a different opinion. Is the stuff that grabs your attention in a negative way. So your stressors. So if you start writing down everything that's in your mind, and you see, well, this is really keeping me up at night, and you get taught a method to sort of attack that problem, then something very strange happens. You get less stressed.
Yeah.
Because you start moving on something that's negative, it's less intimidating, and you start actually improving it. For example, if your health is an issue, and you start defining your first action, that's to find a personal trainer, and you got one, you start moving, well, you actually start doing something that you wouldn't have done without the assistance of a system.
Well, you know, what this does is it's a kind of a Trojan horse, you know, the idea in terms of just self-help and personal growth, because I don't approach telling people they need to be accountable and responsible for, you know, everything in their life. I just ask them what that piece of paper means and what are they going to do with it. And what happens is that it automatically moves them out of complaining and victim mode into the driver's seat.
Mm-hmm.
You know, decide what to do about that potential divorce. Decide what to do about that health issue. Decide what to do about it. And it gets people back in the driver's seat again. And that's what's so different and why it improves the quality of your life. Doesn't mean it's easy. You know, it doesn't mean, you know, this GTD is not about being easy.
No.
You know, if life was easy, you'd never grow or expand or express yourself, you know, whatever. But what it does is you need to be in the driver's seat as opposed to be the victim of, of those things.
I think it's all about that. It's about the proactivity.
Yeah.
And not, like you said, most people react. They don't live, they just react to the impulses that happen. And that kind of puts them in positions where they might not want to be, but they don't really have a plan. So they become part of other people's plans.
Yeah. And I just finished a great book, by the way. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. I don't know if it's in Dutch or not. It's called The Antidote. Happiness for people who are sick of positive thinking.
Okay.
It's really a great book, by the way. It's and the content is even much more sophisticated than the title sounds. It goes into a lot of the stoicism and, you know, that as opposed to just go be happy, 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 you know, just the acceptance of reality is where happiness is really going to come from. Yeah. So acceptance of those things you might consider negative experiences or whatever, that's the source really of satisfaction. Yeah. And I like the word satisfaction as opposed to happy. You know, I'm satisfied with my life. You know, I think that's a much more stable sort of a underlying, you know, nice place to be.
Yeah, I don't need to be happy to be satisfied.
Right.
And I think I'd rather be satisfied than happy. Think about it.
And if you think satisfaction, I mean, if it comes from the Latin, you know, satis enough and facere to doing. There's a sufficient amount of doing is you know, the etymology of the word satisfaction. Yeah. So, yeah. So I think that's a much more elegant way to approach life. So,
Do you think we live in a society that is aiming too much for 100% happiness?
Well, you know, certainly, the advertisers certainly, you know, try to capitalize on that.
Yeah, that's why I asked, because the book obviously caught your interest. So
yeah, and it turns out he's a GTDer. Oliver Berkman is the author, and so I'm going to interview him next week. Yeah, good book.
Yeah, I think we could use a little bit more stoicism. Stoicism is it just acceptance, or is it also reframing an experience or a fact to make it? For example, if you get fired, that could be the worst thing, or that could be an opportunity.
Right.
Is that stoicism? Looking at that,
yeah. Basically, you know, as best I understand it, I mean, I never really studied the Stoics, you know, that much or read a lot of it, but Oliver did quite a bit. And you know, because he's done all the mindfulness stuff, he's done all that, and a lot of that has to do with just acceptance, you know, about what's real, and that acceptance is, you know, puts you in a different state of mind, you know, about any and all of those things. You can operate much more functionally, you know, if you're not trying to resist those things.
Yeah, I get it. I think that this happiness culture that we have also has something. I think it's the thing. Everybody wants to feel ultimately happy. I think that's really a Western thing. Maybe something that's in countries like Holland is really a thing. Because Stoicism, at its height, it was in a period of time where, well, life could really, really suck. I mean, I think it especially, didn't it, like sort of arise in old Rome? Like
The Greeks.
I have this. It's connected to legionnaires and like wasn't there Seneca and Marcus Aurelius are famous Stoics, right?
Right.
Military men that know a life of discomfort and know death from up close.
Right.
I think there's something to do with that as well. And we are so removed from that, we have no idea. And I think that's why people allow themselves these happy, joy thoughts. But if you had a taste of what life could be really like, you would ignore that immediately because life is not like that.
Yeah.
I think that's it.
I like Marcus Aurelius when he was writing about how he was writing in morning journals about how he would be surrounded the rest of the day by cheaters and people who would try to kill him or whatever, disliked him. And that was his way of getting it out of his head and going through the day. His book Meditations is pretty cool. Yeah. It's all about this morning. Basically, it's his view on the world, and it's Stoicism as well.
Yeah, a lot of acceptance in there. What I like about Stoics as well, I'm not sure if that's 100% correct, but I think there's something in there about seeing the humor in things. That's very important as well to be able to deal with whatever ugliness is in front of you. Yeah, I always find that amazing. You should be able to what do you call that? Gallows humor.
Yeah.
A little bit of black humor gets you a long way, especially when life is not really cooperating. Let's say.
Well, it's certainly a key to long-term relationships.
Humor.
Sense of humor. Yeah.
How long have you been married?
That's real romance. Is a sense of humor when you can both laugh at each other and at the situation. That'll keep it alive and well. Yeah.
How long have you been married?
This time?
Yes. Oh, this time. There have been more times?
4, yeah. This time, Catherine and I were married in 1991. So, golly, we're 29 years, 28 years.
Was it the longest one? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the secret here is humor, or are there...
humor is always a secret, always special sauce.
Yeah. But as someone who has had a couple of relations as well that all seem to fall throughout the 7-year period, what would be the big tip you would give me?
Well, the big tip is to make sure what really makes for a long-term relationship is that you're not looking at each other, you're both looking at the same thing. So you're both looking in the same direction, but not necessarily at each other. Yeah. So if you can share the direction that you're going in, that's a real key. Yeah. And looking at each other will last you about 6 months.
The honeymoon weeks last only about that amount of time. Yeah. And when that fades and that's all you had, you're not going to last.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. Interesting. So common goal.
Yeah. Our common values, common goal, common directionality, essentially. Yeah.
Maybe common enemies every now and then. Nothing bonds like a common enemy.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool.
Sure.
We're on time, guys. I have to get to...
What time is it?
It's 12.
Really?
A little bit before 12. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, that flew by again.
Zing.
It seems to be a tendency.
Is this the last time that we've had you in the studio, or can we try it in another 3 years again?
Oh, come on. Another 3 years, I'll be older and smarter.
Yeah.
You guys will be older and smarter.
Yeah,
hopefully.
Maybe we had the king in the studio here.
That would be fun.
That would be great. Yeah.
Yay.
Talk about a desired outcome. Yeah. All right. We didn't get. Yeah, I think we're going to have to do that because there's something coming up in 2021. There's a Getting Things Done
June
Summit.
2021. Yeah, the GTD Global Summit. We did one 10 years ago. I didn't know that I was going to do another one, but now because our work has gone pretty global, and we just have an incredible array. We've got over 40 presenters that are coming on their own dime and just wanted to share. They're all friends of mine. They're all champions of GTD. Marshall Goldsmith, Dan Pink, Charles Duhigg, Katie Coleman, one of the first female astronauts. We coached her while she was on the space station.
Wow.
So a lot of really, really cool folks. So yeah, just go to gtdsummit.com. Take a look.
All right. Thank you so much. And we hope to see you soon.
Yay. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for being here.
Fun as usual.
Thanks for listening, guys. Ciao.